In my last video, I mentioned that I recently swapped to console. I'm on the Xbox Series X now. That is my main platform that I've been playing on, and many people are wondering why I decided to do so, and perhaps if it's worth it, or maybe if it's worth investing in. So I wanted to talk all about that in this video, because when I first picked up the Series X, it was not only a massive stroke of luck that I happened to get a hold of one so quickly, but it was also an adventure to spending a lot more than I anticipated. To paint a picture of my experience before we get into the hypotheticals of switching from last gen consoles or switching from PC and things you may or may not need, when I purchased the Xbox Series X, I was able to get a hold of it on Amazon and got very, very lucky to do so. Getting these new consoles, the Series X or the PS5, is very difficult right now. They generally go in stock randomly, and you have to be ready because they go out of stock pretty quickly from what I understand. So getting one is pretty difficult unless you want to pay some premiums to some resellers. And for some, that might alone deter you from picking one up and rather just grab a PC instead. I'm not sure. When I purchased my Series X, I didn't realize that they were still only using HDMI. It's a newer version of HDMI, however. So if you do buy a Series X, you have to think and check if your monitor supports this new version of HDMI. I believe you at least need HDMI 1.4 if you'd like to use the 120 Hz option or 120 frames per second, which I strongly recommend, especially since I was coming from PC. And if you are someone looking to go back to console from PC, this is mandatory in my opinion. I was not willing to compromise. I'm not playing at 60 FPS. I will only be willing to play on console at 120 FPS. So upon further research, I realized my monitor was not compatible with that newer version of HDMI. So of course that led me to have to purchase a new monitor. And I chose one from a list of known compatible monitors that I'll link in the description. However, I'm sure it's not limited to this. You can try and find another monitor, but my point is that you need to check your monitor if it does support, I believe, HDMI 1.4, or if it's known that it supports 120 FPS with the new consoles. And furthermore, if you need to buy a new monitor like I did to support this, please do a lot of research and double check that it is compatible for a fact. The monitor I ended up buying was the BenQ Mobius EX2510. It's a 24.5-inch IPS display that supports 144 Hz and 1 millisecond delay, and it's been excellent. It's a beautiful monitor, and it costed me about $400 after tax Canadian, so expect a little less in the US currency. So at this point, I had to purchase the Xbox Series X, of course, which was about $700 post-tax Canadian, and then a new monitor, which was about $400. I'm now at about $1,100, and it didn't end there for me. As much as many of you might not care about this, if you are a content creator, plan on being a content creator, or perhaps want to stream with decent quality, you'll have to buy a new capture card. My external HD60S is not capable of outputting or doing 120 FPS throughput, so I now had to buy a new internal capture card for my computer. I had to purchase the Elgato 4K60 Mark II, I believe is the name of it. It's an internal capture card again, and that means I had to check the compatibility with my motherboard. There was a lot of research and money that I didn't know I had to spend. So my moral of the story here is don't surprise yourself. Double check everything and research what you need and what you'd like before just buying the console. Buying the console is only the beginning because of all of these new standard specifications. Now for me, even after pretty much buying a new setup in a way, this was still worth it, but that's because I'm a content creator. That's because this is what I do, so I can justify this a little bit more. For someone who isn't doing this and just looking to play, this is a lot steeper of an entry in my opinion than it looks like on the surface, between even just trying to acquire one of the new consoles to having to buy a new monitor as well with that potentially. But in Destiny, I think if you're passionate enough about the game, it might be well worth it, and there's a few reasons for that. First and foremost right now, cheaters are absolutely plaguing PC, especially in trials, and there doesn't seem to be an end of that, at least right now, in sight. So for me, I had enough, and it was worth the investment to just switch to console. Secondly, there's going to be crossplay implemented. However, it is kind of pseudo-excluding PC. In crossplay, the consoles will be able to match each other by default, but you need to have a PC player in your lobby with a console player to expand that pool to the PC population as well. That's how I understood that. Correct me if I'm wrong. And if that is the case, that just means the combined population of Xbox and PlayStation is going to be so much greater than that of PC, and you don't have cheaters. My last reasoning for swapping to console is that I think based on changes in the past and sandbox updates that we've seen, I think controller is still the main focus of balancing for Destiny 2. And this might seem like a really hot take, but I personally believe that the game plays better at this point in time on controller than on mouse and keyboard. Yeah, I know that might be a spicy take, but for me personally, I think the gameplay is better on controller in my opinion. So to elaborate on those 3 points, I don't think I need to elaborate anymore on the cheater problem. It's very obvious that cheaters have been a massive problem on PC Destiny 2, and I really just wanted to get away from that, as it's really annoying a lot of the time how frequent it is. And on top of that, consoles just received their DDoS protection, so that was one of the only things really keeping me from console, and now you can just play console with relatively no worries. To further the crossplay point just a little bit more, I don't see why you wouldn't want to play on the platform or shared platform space with the healthiest and biggest player population. Sure, sometimes competition is good, but playing the same people over and over again, I think gets stale a little bit. I again think competition is great, but I think a healthy player base overall is really important to have, and we see how that's negatively affected PC in some ways as well. And once again, you get this massive player pool without the worry of having to go into the PC territory and have cheaters. But I mean, if you wanted, you could still play with your PC friends and still have a great quality of game running at 120 FPS, or I guess if you have an older monitor and you're okay with it, 60 FPS. Now to talk about the hot take, when I switched to PC, and I think a lot of people swapped to PC even after the release of it, it was because the quality of the game was so insanely better than what consoles had to offer at the time. Going from 30 FPS to 120 plus FPS is a massive change, and the game both looks better, feels better, aiming feels better and is more instantaneous and responsive, and everything about the game was just so much better in terms of the quality of the game itself. Now that we have consoles capable of 120 FPS in the Crucible, and I'm happy to report feel nearly identical to PC with controller, I don't see a reason of why I would continue to play on PC. I'm aware that many players love the way Destiny plays on mouse and keyboard. Personally, over the years, I think I've had a little bit of enough of it, and I would just want to go play against controller players again, and I mentioned I think the game plays better on that, because I feel positioning is more valuable and punishable on controller than it is on mouse and keyboard, because of the insane ability and freedom of movement you have on mouse and keyboard, which can ultimately, of course, give you an insanely high skill ceiling, which is why some people enjoy it, but at the same time be a mistake fixer as well. Perhaps a massive annoyance with this is sometimes the game doesn't even look like it can keep up with the movements. Things like people sliding backwards while shooting at me while being in a sliding position but moving backwards happen all too frequently, and it's really annoying to look at and go against. Things integral to Destiny's balancing, like the fact that reticle friction is a massive part of dictating how good a weapon feels like in certain range, doesn't matter on mouse and keyboard when reticle friction is not a factor. Of course, there is still aim assist cone, which is a factor, of course, bullet magnetism, but that still doesn't stop you from using a weapon at way farther ranges than perhaps intended with the game's balancing. And on top of that, you typically have lower recoil, which makes sense because on a mouse you don't have an unlimited range of motion, but with that lower recoil, you still have just as big of an aim assist cone. So with mouse and keyboard, there's actually less chances of, let's say, a hand cannon moving off target off of its aim assist cone while shooting a target than there is on controller, which has higher recoil and is a little bit more jarring and inconsistent. I'm not trying to say one's stronger than the other, but this disparity leads to some inconsistency, which I've personally gotten just a bit tired with. The current DMT meta on mouse and keyboard is an excellent example of a weapon that on controller is decent, it's good, but it's harder to hipfire with precision on controller, and on mouse and keyboard, it has what looks like the aim assist cone of controllers, but all the precision of mouse and keyboard at the hip, and you don't even need reticle friction for its range, so you're still able to use it pretty effectively at 150 RPM even at range. Another example of things that I've noticed over time about mouse and keyboard that I kind of just want to go play against controller players again is the fact that the in-air accuracy on mouse and keyboard is so much better. The fact that you not only have more precision on mouse and keyboard, but also you don't get an aim assist penalty like you do on controller. So just to be clear, there is a penalty on controller where your aim assist cone shrinks very small when you're in the air. That does not exist, as far as I can tell in testing, on mouse and keyboard. So not only do you have better inherent accuracy with your ability to shoot, of course, if you're a competent mouse and keyboard player, but you also have more aim assist, a greater margin of error. And to me, that makes it so that you can, of course, fly and play in the air and play crazy angles a lot more, which is cool if you're into that. But for me, again, I just think that invalidates positioning sometimes and some of the map structure. And I think just as much as it does allow you to make some incredibly high skill plays, which is awesome, it also does and can serve as a mistake fixer, or again, perhaps fix bad positioning. I think mouse and keyboard in the way that it currently acts in Destiny 2 facilitates a lot more being able to fly at people, charge with a shotgun, play in air, play super crazy fast, and kind of sometimes, not always, just saying sometimes, ignore some of the structure and positioning on the maps. I think to do those things on console, there is a higher degree of risk and commitment required, which, as much as I still don't like people flying at people with shotguns, I think is still healthier. I think the same problems in some cases, like I'm saying now, exists on both console or with controller and mouse and keyboard. I think mouse and keyboard just exaggerates it that much more. And then there's other small things like the hunter dodge being able to go crazy because it's not locked to a turn radius, chaos reach being able to nuke the map because it's not locked to a turn radius, and same with other supers in some instances. Some crazy silly movement you can do just by spinning your mouse around. Let's say in Behemoth, I've seen some crazy things. For some, these might be enjoyable, and it might increase the skill ceiling and the chaotic aspect of Destiny, and if you love that, then yeah, maybe sticking to PC if you're already a PC player despite the cheaters, because you love mouse and keyboard that much and the way it plays, might be worth it for you. Or if that looks interesting to you, that kind of insane freedom you get, well, maybe that's worth going from a last-gen console to PC instead. But for me, I don't believe personally that this is fully intended or perhaps the healthiest way that the game could play, so I prefer console now that it supports 120 FPS. Finally, I don't know if this is a true factor or not, but I only say this because we've seen proof of it. In the past, frame rate has affected player movements, specifically the super in-air melee attacks or just melee attacks in general in the air. They went farther with higher FPS. So that kind of variability is another thing that I wonder if it's affecting the physics on PC. I'm not sure what that's affecting, how that's affecting maybe some of the game keeping up with things, or again, just a variable in terms of how effective some things are. I'm not sure, but with console, at least you're having a standardized frame rate that's going to be 120, 60, or I guess 30 if you're matching with the old gen consoles as well. And again, since it's less variable, maybe there's some more consistency in that, because honestly, I have not seen that a lot of those things happen on console as much or at all. If you're a last gen player right now on Xbox One or PS4 and you're deciding between one of the two, I strongly recommend console for a lot of the reasons that I mentioned in this video. And even just the upgrade to 60 FPS from 30 will be a massive jump. So perhaps getting the console sooner and then a new monitor if necessary later is still worth it. Because right now you're only used to 30 FPS, which man, even 30 to 60 is such an insane difference. Now, if you're a PC player currently like I was that wants to go back to console because maybe you're really tired of cheaters, is it worth it? Overall for me, I think, like I said earlier, yes, I've been enjoying it so much more. I like it a lot, not worrying about cheaters, and any of that stuff that I mentioned is great. However, I want to say for the average person or for someone that even is just a Destiny enthusiast, I'm not sure you should be in a rush perhaps to get the consoles. It really depends on, do you have the monitor already or like a good enough monitor to match and play 120 FPS? And are you willing to accept that you're pretty much just buying a console for PvP, because the PvE is still better quality on PC? So that's something to think of as well. It's much more of a PvP driven decision than it is a PvE driven decision. So like I said, as for me, it's been worth it. I've been in love with it. I think for even a Destiny enthusiast, you shouldn't perhaps be in a rush to get the new consoles, and it's gonna be quite an investment for, again, something that you're already kind of getting, but you're really just doing it to evade the shortcomings right now of PC Destiny 2. But then again, we don't know if that's going to change, right? So anyways, that's everything I have to say about my experience on console swapping from PC and back to console, and if I think it's overall worth it. So hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.